because there he wasn't being mechayiv himself with any money when he was moida, because if he is moida, the tavach hamocher doesn't cost him anything, and he's just being moida to get saved from paying the dal b'hei. In that case, Dr. Hamnuna and the Gemara writes to him that he's not chayiv. I'm sorry, that if Adam came later, the Idah will not pater him. We had to make a distinction between being moida, shetavach u'machar, which won't pater you if Adam come later, versus the case where Rabbi Gamaliel was moida to Rabbi Yeshua, that he knocked out the eye, that he blinded Tevi's eye. So the Rishonim tell us that it's worse when you're moida on the tficha mechira after you deny the geneva, because there you've already, when you denied the geneva, by definition you obviously denied the tficha mechira as well. A. B is once Adam come that you ganvid, so you're already afraid there's already a biasusa, so you're going to be moida on the tficha mechira. That's a shvach haidah. There Rabbi Amnuna says that if Adam come and say tavach u'machar later on, the person will be chayiv, and the haidah will not pater him. However, in Rabbi Gamaliel's case, where he was moided, there was no biasusa whatsoever, he never denied it, and therefore, even if Adam came later, he would be pater, which is what the Brisa said. That was one halacha we learned yesterday. The other halacha we learned yesterday is this new concept that we were introduced to of Eidu Shiyat Yochal Azim. If you have Eidim that for whatever reason it's impossible to be mazim them, those aren't good Eidim. They're saying Eidus knowing that they can't be held liable for any falsity that they say. That by definition makes them not kosher. However, Sumchus made a distinction. Sumchus said it all depends on why you can't be mazim them. If it's because they were very vague about the date, about the time, about the place, so they refused to give us coordinates that would allow us to pinpoint whether they were actually there or not, then we have a possibility to be mazim them, because Adam can say, you weren't there at that time, you were with us at that time. That's Eidush Yet Yachal Azima, because their Eidush B'nei Ubei is being vague, is being evasive. But if the reason why these Adam you cannot be mazim is because the subject of the Eidos was moida, yes, they saw me, I did this in front of them. For instance, in our case, where the Gana said, I did this act of Gneva in front of Reuben and Shimon, then they're also Iyat Yachal Azima, because you have Haidah of the Baldin. That Iyat Yachal Azima is in fact a strengthening of the Eidos. It's because the Baldin is moida to them, their Sumchus would hold, that is called Eidos, Iyat Yachal Azima, that are kosher Eidos. Okay. That was the discussion of yesterday, and now we're going to start the Daf Ayin Vov, and it's a little bit of a new subject, right at the top. It goes back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah is Ganav v'Hikdish. If someone stole, and then he was Makdashit, and who was Makdashit was the subject of a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, probably about a week ago, when we learned the sugya of Yiyosh Koina by a Ganav. So let's have a look at the Mishnah, and we'll remind ourselves how the Gemara understood the Mishnah before. So the Gemara says as follows. The Mishnah says as follows. Oh, I think I'm at the wrong Mishnah. We must have another Mishnah here. Here's the Mishnah stuff. I endowed him with this. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says as follows: Ganav v'hiktish v'achagach tabach u'machar mishalom tashlum ekefel ve'ein mishalom tashlum edalbei. So let's have a look at this case. Ganav v'hiktish. Who was Makdish? So the Gemara, when the Gemara was analyzing this Mishnah related to the machlokes of Yiyosh Koida, the Gemara wanted to bring a raya that Yiyosh alone is not Koida. Why? Because Ganav v'hikdish wouldn't do anything if it was Mimalisha. If it was before Yush, the Hektish wouldn't work. And if it was after Yush, if you hold Yush is Kaina, then the Yush alone makes it that it's no longer the owner's animal, and therefore you don't pay Dal V'Hei, even if the Ganev was not Makdashit, it still would be part from Dal V'Hei if the Baalim are Miyayish and Yush alone is Kaina. Therefore, it must be Yush alone is not Kaina. So it was Ganav. And then the Baalim are Miyayish. And we bought the Baalim are Miyayish, then the Hiklish, now the Ganev is able to be Makdashit. And then V'Yachar Tavach Misham Tashlim and Kefil, which is before it became Akdish. V'Ein Misham Tashlim Dal V'Hei, because that occurred after it became Akdish. That's how Rabbi Yochanan learned, and he had a raya that Yush alone is not clean. Zok Reish Lakish, that's not what it means. Ganav V'Hikdish doesn't mean the Ganav was Makdish. It means the Bailam were Makdish. Rabbi Yochanan holds, if you steal something, the Bailam can't be Makdish because it's Einar B'Rishusai. Rish Lakish argues Rabbi Yochanan, and Rish Lakish shows like the Bryce of Tznuin. If you remember, the Bryce of Tznuin was where these people steal figs out of someone's field, and there happened to be Netter Rabai, so the owner says, anything that gets taken out of my field, I'm being Mechal, the Kedusha of the Netter Rabai on money that I have in my house. So you see clearly, even though it's not in my Rishus, I am able to be Makish. So Rish Lakish learns this is Ganav V'Hektish. The Ganav stole it, the owner made it Hektish, and he could make it Hektish because he holds like Tznuin. Because it belongs to Hektish.
Tavach was the gun.
Tavach is the Ganav, that's right. So these are the two ways we have to learn it. We're going to be focusing on Rabbi Yochanan's way, that Ganav Hikdish means the Ganav was Makdashit, and there was Yush, but Yush alone is not Kaina, and then the Ganav was Makdashit. So now let's have a look back at the Gemara. Ganav Hikdish v'yachagach tabachumach. Amri, the Gemara asks, Bishlama atvicha loy mechayiv. I understand why you're not chayiv for tvicha. You know why? The chikatabach, the hektish kata. When you shechted it, it belonged to hektish. Zok Rashi, kikatabach, tabel achar yish kaiminam. It's after yish. Of course, this is the way Rabbi Yochanan learned. The lefnei yish, if it was before yish, loy kacha, it wouldn't have become hektish. The chivin the ayish, since the Baalim Rabbi Yayish already, kanya hektish be yish v'shinu rishus. Why is hektish kanya? Because if there's yish and then there's shinu rishus, transferring it from the Ganez rishus to the hektish rishus, that's a shinu rishus. Hilchach lav d'mareikata. Therefore, it's no longer the animal of the Baalim. That's why it's part from Dalvei. But the question is, ela hektish l'chayiv. Forget the fact that it became hektish, but becoming hektish in and of itself is a mechira. So of course this can't be according to Shlokish, because Shlokish learns it was the Baalim who was makdish. It can't be mechayiv the Ganav Dal if the Baalim makdish. But if you're learning like Rabbi Yochanan that the Ganav was makdish, so by being makdish, why is it that different than selling it, than giving it away as a gift? So that being makdish alone for the Gemara should trigger a chiv Dal because mali machray lahedit, mali machray l'shamayim. What's the difference who he sold it to? The fact of the matter is he sold it. Let's just take a little quick peek in the second Tosfos. Ela hektish l'chayiv zokt Tosfos kula hach sugya Rabbi Yochanan. Of course, this sugya is only following Rabbi Yochanan, like we just discussed. Udeloy keresh lokish to muki lola'il kishektishu bailim b'yad gan. Okay, beautiful. Zokt the Gemara weiter. Zokt the Gemara weiter. Hamani, and for the Gemara, you know what we're going like? Rabbi Shimon, we're going according to Rabbi Shimon. The Omar who says, Kachim shechayiv b'achar yusam, if you're makdish something, for instance, you say, Harei halai oila, and then you designate an animal to be your oila. Now, if something happens to that animal, you're going to have to replace it with another animal. So even though it belongs to hektish, it's still very much connected to you because you're responsible for it still. So we're talking about, now we're making a new kimta. We're talking about what type of hektish was it? It was a hektish of harei alai. It was a carbon of harei alai. So now we're saying what type of hektish was it? It was a carbon. And what type of carbon was it? Thank you so much. It was a carbon of harei alai. We just racked up two kimtas. A is kacheh guf. B is harei alai. And since it's somewhat still connected to him, therefore the hektish itself would not be considered a mechira. Let's see Rashi, because this requires a little bit of logical calisthenics. Zokt Rashi, Rav Shimoni, uchagoyin she'omar harei alai. And then the hifrish gnei bezul in Israel. And then the guy that designated this animal that he stole to fulfill his nether. The kiv and the chai bechor Yosy, since should anything happen to this animal, even though it's an animal hektish, but if something should happen to it after he made it hektish, the ganim is going to have to backfill that. So therefore, this animal of hektish to the ganim is a dover hagorim l'mam. Because if something happens to it, even though it's not his, it will be goyim that he will have to pay more mammon by buying another animal. So therefore, v'dover hagorim l'mam who, and we paskin Rav Shimon holds is kamam dummy. Rav Shimon holds even though you don't own something, but if it has an effect on your pocketbook, for instance, if it's gone, it's going to cost him money. That's also somewhat of an ownership, and therefore v'lav mechiri. The fact that he gave it to hektish isn't enough to trigger the mechira, the chiv of a tabach u'mocher. It's not enough to be mechayiv with dal v'hei, because he's not completely severed from it. He's still somewhat connected. So, for Rashi, if it still belongs to him, so why is it that if he shechted it, he'll be chayiv, right? It says ganav v'hektish v'achach tabach u'mocher. He won't be chayiv for the tficha either. Why is he chayiv? So why is he not chayiv for the tficha? If we're saying it's his, because it's tadar v'agarim the moment for him, so when he's shechting it, it still is. It's not hektish's animal. So why is he chayiv on tficha? You know why? Even though, yes, in that respect, we consider it somewhat of the Rishus Ganav, because if it gets lost, if hektish's animal gets lost, the Ganav is going to have to backfill it. So therefore, we're not considering the act of being makashit as a mechira. Nevertheless, nevertheless, chol alei mi Hashem hektish lafuker mishusmora kamel. At least the Shem hektish was chal on it to remove it from the possession of the original owner of the nigzal, and therefore v'lav demor katab. So it's not the owner's animal anymore, regardless. Therefore, you put her on tficha. But the act of making it into hektish's animal shouldn't constitute a chiyuv of mecher because you're still somewhat connected. That is the shot in the Gemara according to Rashi. So giving it to hektish is a transferring of a shus, but it's not quite a mecher because the ganav is still somewhat connected. Amani Rab Shimon Yidamar Kachim Shechayev Bechor Yuson Birshusei Dimarei Kaimi. They'll still considered to be in the domain of the owner, meaning of the person who's mechuyev to replace it with, in this case, the ganav. Frek the Gemara, how can you suggest that the beginning of the Mishnah is going according to Rab Shimon? Hamid the Sefer Rab Shimon Haba. Rab Shimon only gets introduced, he only steps onto the stage of our Mishnah at the end of the Mishnah. So Reish Alav Rab Shimon. And if we look back to actually see the Mishnah inside, it'll become very clear. Look at our Mishnah. It says, Gana v'hikdish v'yachar gachta b'chumacher v'sham t'shlume kefel v'einu m'sham t'shlume dal b'hei. And then Rab Shimon gets onto the stage and tells us, Kachim shechayv v'charusha m'sham t'shlume dal b'hei shein chayv potter. So obviously, this line right before is not going according to Rab Shimon. So without Rab Shimon's chiddush of Davar Agarim Lamam Kamamandami, there must also be a tour for Tabach Umachar when the Ganav is Makish. So you cannot use Rab Shimon to explain this because Rab Shimon did not enter the stage. Zok the Gemara, Dr. Gemara, Elahacha b'may askinon. Let's abort the original teretz that we tried to say, and now we're going to have a new thought. Elahacha b'may askinon b'kachim kalam. What type of kachim is it? So now we have a third ukim. Right now we're saying it's not bedek abayis, it's a kachim, but it's not any type of kachim. It's only kachim kalam. For instance, he made it into a shlomim or a toida. Why does that make an oish mechira? Because v'alibud Rabbi Yosy aglili the omar kaddish kalim maman bailam hu u'b'shusei kain. Rabbi Yosy aglili holds until the animal is shechted, until the carbon shlomim is shechted, the animal belongs to the owner. It's maman bailam, and therefore the act of making it into a shlomim, harezu shlomim or hayalai shlomim, will not transfer the animal out of the rishus haganev, and therefore that act alone is not going to trigger the chiyuv dal bay for mechira, but it is, like Rashi said a moment ago, enough out of your rishus that if you shechted it at that point, you're not going to be chayiv because it's lav jidei katovach, because it left the rishus of the original owner. Let's see Rashi. The Rabbi Yosy clearly b'perakam. In the first parak we learned that he holds kaddish kalam maman bailam. Hey, therefore lav mechiri. Therefore, making it into a shlomim does not qualify as a mechira to trigger the chiyuv of daled v'hei. Okay. Umiyu, however, mishusmor kaimav kinu shem hektish. The shem hektish took it out of the possession of the original owner, and therefore, if you shecht it afterwards, the chitavach lav demora katab. Period. Let's learn like Rashi's first shot. Zok the Gemara weiter. Aval kacha kacha mai. So if he made it hektish into an oila, for instance, mishalem tashlumi dal v'chamisha, are you saying that there he would pay? So it's a little bit difficult to make such an ukimta. When our Mishnah says, Gana ve'hiktish v'yachach tav, why aren't you chayiv? Why aren't you chayiv for the tvichu mechira? Because being makdashit wasn't taking it out of your rishus because you made it into kaddish kalam, you made it into a shlom. But had you made it into an oila, you would actually be chayiv dal v'hei for the act of making it into an oila. Don't you think the Mishnah should say that? Now, the Tani Reisha, there was an earlier case in the earlier Mishnah that discussed hektish as well. And this is what it said. It said, Gana v'tavach, if you first stole it and made a tvicha mechira, and after the tvicha mechira, v'yarga hektish, there in Yisham Tashlum Dal V'hei, which indicates that the only way you would pay Dal V'hei is if the hektish only occurred after the tvicha. But there's no way that the hektish can occur before the tvicha where there would be a chiyuv Dal V'hei. But based on what we're saying right now, you could even have a case of being makdashit before the tvicha mechira, and there'll still be a chiyuv Dal V'hei. Live like v'lisni b'dida. Where do we say Ganav hikdish does not trigger a chiyuv dal v'hei? Is because Shum Kalim. If the Ganav was Ganav v'hikdish, he could be dal v'hei. If it was Kadishim, if it was Kadish Kachim. Yet the Mishnah couldn't find such a case. The Mishnah was only able to find the case where there's a chiyuv dal v'hei if you first did the tzvicha mechira and only then you were makdish. Why? We found a simple case according to the way we're understanding the Mishnah now. Ela la'olam, you're forced to say loisna kachim kachim, loisna kachim kalim. No matter what, if you gana v'hikdish, that wouldn't constitute a mechira. It wouldn't trigger a chiyuv daled v'hei. We have a problem with the kashalach mali machar lehedit mali machar l'shamayim. Why doesn't the actual act of being makdashit in and of itself trigger a chiyuv daled v'hei because it's a mechira? Zok the Gemara balabatish. You say balabatish, that's always the best. My Rebbe in Cheder used to always tell me, yeah, but they turn like lamdish, they don't like balabatish. Could be lamdish is much more glamorous, but the emes is balabatish. Balabatish say pashit. Zok the Gemara, mali machar shemayim. The difference is simple. If Reuben sells an ox to Shimon, until now they said this is Reuben's ox, and then they're going to say now it's Shimon's ox. But the Machar l'Shemayim, If you were makdish your carbon, make car to the Reuven. People say this is Reuven's ox. Now they say, oh, this is Reuven's Zoila. But it's still called Reuven's. So therefore, that will not trigger a Chiv Dal Vei. And it doesn't make a difference if it's Kachim Kachim, if it's Kachim Kalim. Either way, people are going to refer to it. They say the Ganim's Kalim. Right? It's always going to be known according to his name. Without all the lumdison. Pashup shot. Let's see Rashi. Adatani ratio the mashma dloi motzil misni chiyuv basud aktish. It's a mashma from the ratio that you cannot find a way to be mechayiv dal vei after the God was makdashit. But in fact, according to Rabbi Yosy, clearly we do have a way. Live like the listening b'seifo lashmina chiyuva afilu hechadak is kodem tvicha. And with the Gemara, machar lahadit mekar teru deruven kodem shemacharei korashar al shmoy shel ganev. Before the ganev sold it. It was called the Ganev's ox. And once the Ganev sold it, Kari al Shem Lekayach. Now it's Chaim's ox. Avol Machar L'Shamayim. But if he made it into a carbon, which we're referring to as a Mechir L'Shamayim, Adayin Shem Hamakdisha Olav, the owner's name is still referenced when you're talking about this carbon, Shakaru Eilosoy Shalplayim. Beautiful. Very, very simple pshat. Balavatish, which always works the best. Okay, gewaltig. So let's have a quick look at Tosfos that puts things a little bit into perspective. Frek Tosfos is a problem because we have a Gemara that seems to contradict what we're saying now. We have a Gemara that says exactly the opposite of what we just learned. That when you're makdish something, that mechira to hektish, that giving it to hektish is a mechira. And for Tosfos, hainu bekache bedek abayis. That's by kache bedek abayis to a mikri al shem bailu. This animal will always be called Chaim's carbon. But if someone gives a beam to hektish or an animal to hektish, and it's for bedek abayis, it's the balmum. There, it's no longer called his oila. Now it's in the warehouse of hektish. What about Kachim Mizbeach that we're talking about? That is considered Turah de Reuven. So, Afal Gav de Mikram Shal Bailim. Will I have a hektish kemechira, and therefore being makdish an animal to a carbon does not constitute a mechira to trigger a chiv dal vei. Mikol Mokim, nevertheless, Lamandama Yish Loi Kani. If your Yish is not Kana, Choshev to Yish Vishinu Rishus. It's still considered Yish Vishinu Rishus. In other words, how was Hektish Chal? Hektish is only Chal because combined with the prior Yish of the Bailim, and now you're transferring the animal into Hektish, that Yish and Shinu Rishus allows the Hektish to be Chal, leading the Chal Hektish Achar Yish. So you're right. In one perspective, it's still called Turah de Reuven, so it doesn't trigger Chiv Dal Vei. But Lamaisa, mechanically, technically, the animal is transferred. Technically, the animal is becoming hektish. And the transaction works. It just doesn't trigger a Chiv Dal Vei. The boiler, the Gemara on Daf Tamach Bava is wanted to be Garaya from Abaye to Rabba, the Yish Loikani. And if you remember, it was at the top of Amamad Beis. Mikarbonai Veloy Agozol. The Gemara wanted to know, how did you make it? There had to be hektish. There had to be Yish, otherwise you couldn't make it hektish at all, right? So I believe you have a right at Yish. Alone is not kind of. Vafilu hachi Omar Shom the whole hektish. Afagav da kati lo sagadaite. That was Yish and Shinu Hashem. Elam Mishum da Yish v'Shinu Shus. It's clear that even if Yish is not kind of, after Yish combined with the Shinu Shus of going into hektish, that makes the kinyan to hektish. So clearly, hektish technically is going to own it, but it's not enough to trigger a chiv dal v'hei because we still call it Reuven's carbon. So it almost sounds like it's not about technically if it's a mechira, it's about perception, right? Since it's perceived that it's still Reuven's ox, even though technically it's not, it's hektish, that perception is enough that it won't trigger the Chiv Dal Vei. So it's a big chiddush that to trigger Chiv Dal Vei, you need more than the actual chalosh of the transaction. You actually need that it should be perceived as having changed.
That's everything we know.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Zok the Heilige Gemara Vayter. Rab Shimon Omer. Now we have to look at Rab Shimon, because let's analyze this very carefully. What did Rab Shimon say in the Mishnah? Shimon said, not all karbonos are you going to say you don't pay dal for. It depends. If it's kachum shechayev b'chariyuson, then the ganev, if he shechs it, will be chayev dal vei. Masham tashlum dal vei. But if it's ein chayev b'chariyuson, but if he said arezu and he has no connection to it anymore, potter, then he will be potter from dal vei. So let's analyze what's going on over here, exactly what the case is, because that's what's going to lead us to have difficulty and then a better understanding. So let's see the Gemara. Rab Shimon Omer, Amri, Nehidus of Rab Shimon, Mali Macher Lahedit, Mali Macher L'Shamayim. Granted, Rab Shimon holds the Mechira alone will trigger a Chiyuv Dal Vei. I'll give you that. In other words, he'll disagree with our Terutzim before, and he'll disagree with what the Tanakama says, and he'll say Mali Macher Lahedit, Mali Macher L'Shamayim, merely transferring it into Hektish should be Mechayv Dal Vei. But let's think about it. What's transferring it into Hekdish's position? If it's kachim she einoi chayiv b'chariyuson, means I'm totally disconnecting from it. I'm not responsible for it anymore. There, when I gave it to Hekdish, that giving it to Hekdish should be considered a good mechira. So I'm cutting off from it. I'm not responsible for it anymore. But kachim she chayiv b'chariyuson, where I'm giving it, but I'm still connected to it, there I would suggest that maybe Rab Shimon would hold that's not enough of a transition into Hektish, not enough of a transfer. We're still connected to it. So if that's the case, Ibcha mi boile. Rab Shimon should have paskened exactly the opposite of what he actually paskened. And he should have said, Kachim shechai b'chariyuson, where it's not completely given over because I'm still connected to it, because I still have to replenish it if something happens to it. Potter. There I'll be potter from the Mechira. That Katali and say it didn't totally leave my rishus, I'm still responsible. But kachim she'eina chayiv b'chariyuson, there I should be chayiv because the mafkelei meir shusei. Beautiful gash.
Lo de Friedrich gibt es, das gash.
Well, I don't understand what you mean. Lot
was mit Friedrich gesagt, that's before it's called his garden.
Well, so how else are you going to learn it any way you want? How else do you want to learn it? Yeah. Okay. So let's stop. Let's stop a second. Amri, Nehid is over Rab Shimon. Because at this point, this is a very, very important note that Rashi is making. Because Mishum Tvicha Loy Mechayev Rab Shimon. This that Rab Shimon said you're chayev, he's not going on the Tvicha. Even though the Tanakama is talking about Tabach Umacher, either one will not trigger Dal Vei. When Rab Shimon says there is a chayev Dal Vei, definitely not for the Tvicha. If someone shechted it after he was makdish it, he's agreeable that it was the hektish animal that he was tabach. He's focusing on the same thing that we've been focusing until now, is the actual making it into hektish. Will that be considered a mechir? So the salka daitach mishum tvicha loy mechayev leRab Shimon. The afilu of frishu l'shem neder hamrutal alav achrayis. Even if it's a neder, novek mershus mori kama v'nasis hashomer lahektish. And therefore, that's clear that in that respect, he's moida that it's enough hektishes that when he's shechting it, it's not the original owner. As Rashi repeated earlier twice. The Gemara thinks now that Reb Shimon said Yechayev, it's because of the actual making it into hektish, ashayti the hektish, because that act of being makdashit, dava mechira. Hilchach mi boile the meir. If we're talking about the hektish itself being the transaction, that is the mechira, that's triggering the chiyuv, well then the question is, the svar should be the opposite. It should be chayiv, it's ein chayiv b'charut. Zok to Gemara, Amri Rab Shimon amos achritikay. Rab Shimon is not even talking about this case. Rab Shimon is commenting on a completely different case. After we learned the story with Sumchas yesterday, that he's arguing on a case that's not even mentioned, we can say it in Rab Shimon as well. And this is what he's talking about. We learned earlier, Ein hagoynev achar haganev misham t'shlimid al vei. If you steal from a ganev, so a ganev stole Reuven's object, and then someone else came along and took that object from the Ganav, he doesn't pay Dal Behi. V'chein goyniv hektish mibeis bailim, and if the bailim were makdish something, potter, you're potter if you steal it. So if someone has an animal in his house that he was makdish, it's his oila, and you got to go take his carbon oila, you're going to be potter. Why? My timer, v'gunav mibeis ish v'lo mibeis hektish. When you're stealing an animal that's a carbon from an owner, you're taking it from hektish. You're not taking it from the owner. And therefore, the Torah is miramis to us that there's no chiyuv, kefil, or dalad behei for such a gneva. And this is what Rab Shimon is disputing. Rab Shimon Omer kachim shechayev b'achar yuzan is going to be chayev. If the owner said arei alai oila, and the owner now designated this animal for the oila, and then you steal that animal from the owner, that's called the goyniv mibeis ish, because the fact that he has to replenish it makes it mibeis ish. That's what Reb Shimon said. Shimon Omer, Kodshim Shechai Becharisun Chayiv, my timer, Karina Bay, Begunav Mibeis Ish, but the Shein Chai Becharisun Potter, the Loy Karina Lay, Begunav Mibeis Ish. So I just want to stop for a second. The Friedrich Sugya, which was contemplating whether the actual giving it to Hektish was a Mechir or not, we learned Sai and Rashi, and Sai and Tosfos is not going according to Rish Lakish. Because according to Rish Lakish, what was the case all along? Where the Bailam was Makdish, which is exactly how the Gemara is learning Rab Shimon. So according to Rish Lakish, it comes with so much Kishmaker in the Mishnah, because that's what we're talking about all along, when the Bailam was Makdish. But even according to Rabbi Yochanan, who wants to learn that the beginning of the Mishnah is talking about where the guy was Makdish, he has to agree that once Rab Shimon started talking, the discussion was when the Bailam was Makdish. Now, retroactively, I remember when we learned the Machlekes, Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, we thought it was a single doichik that Rish Lakish still denied, where Bailam was Makdish. This is going to have a hikdish. He was Makdish. Now that you see Rab Shimon, Rish Lakish is going to Shmak, because now Rab Shimon, that's in the Zach. He's talking to the same thing that the Chum were talking about. Okay. Maybe we say more. Maybe you have arrived from Rab Shimon that he holds that Yish is kind of, because he at the misverstein the Chachamim that what they were talking about is with the Bailam or Makdish. Okay, so let's see the Gemara back. Michti. Let's look at this a little bit more closely. Shamin Rab Shimon. We heard that Rab Shimon said. We know this is what he says. Shchita she'eni ru'ya loy shema shchita. Right. That's another one of the shitas that Rab Shimon has. Right. He holds shchita she'eni ru'ya loy shema shchita. So now we know there's two important chadushim. He holds darva agarim l'mam and kamam and dami. And the old shchita she'eni ru'ya shchita, meaning a shchita that's not matter. What he's shechting b'achila is not considered a shchita, and therefore it wouldn't be mechuyev for v'tabach. So, Frek the Gemara, Kachim, we're here speaking about a carbon, right? The Bailam had a carbon. The guy went and stole this oila from the Bailam, or let's say he stole the shlum from the Bailam, because we're talking about eating. Kachim nami shchita she'eni ru'yi, because after you shech the carbon, can you eat it? No, you can't. Even Kachim Kalam, you have to put his rika. So every shchita of Kachim is a shchita she'eni ru'yi. No, you can eat. There's a part of meat you like, eat raw meat right away.
Referring to timeline, it's referring to.
But the Gemara is asking, shchita nami, shchita skachim nami, shchita she'eni ru'yi. Zokt Rashi. I said because it was Rika, so you're right. I'm going to take that back. Well, let's look at Rashi. Kachim nami shchita she'eni ru'yi. Why? The kachim hanishchoten bechutz psulim. Where did he shecht it? He didn't shecht it in the Beis Hamikdash. He stole it and he shechted it. So he made this animal also. My time with Rab Shimon, the Omar Kachim Shechayev Becharisun Chayev, the Mashmashim Gonav Kachim, the Tovcham, the Chayev at the Shlomid Alvei. But how could that be? It's a Shchita She'en Ruya. So Gemara Kiasher Rav Dimi Omar Rabbi Yochanan. It's speaking b'Shoichet Mimim Mibifnim. He actually took the carbon and he had them shechted inside the Beis Hamikdash, or he shechted it inside the Beis Hamikdash, l'shem bailam, and he shechted it l'shem bailam. Frank Gemara, if he did that, he shouldn't be chayiv anything. You know why? Because by shechting it in the Beis Hamikdash l'shem bailam, he's returned it to the bailam. The harei chal recurring the bailam. So that can't be the case where he's going to be chayiv dal v'hei. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avin shenishbach adam. It's speaking where after he shechted it inside l'shem bailam, the blood got spilled out. Now this animal cannot be eaten. So it's shchita she'en ruya. That's one pshat. in this? Why was it why is it so when he shechted it, there was a shchita ruya, and later on, and therefore he's chayv dal v'hei. Later on, the dam spilled out, and therefore we don't say chazor keren l'bayim.
It's in the case that he shechted l'shem ba'alam.
So b'shas shchita was a shchita ruya, but later on, it was nishbach adam.
By the shchita, if he goes to Bas English with this l'shem ba'alam, right? And he shechts l'shem ba'alam, it's not called he's shechting it. It's called like he's a shlich from the Baal.
That's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says it's a proper shchita. It's a proper shchita.
And 2 lines ago, the Gemara says then,
so the reason why it's not chazal b'ayim is because it was nishbach adam. So the Bible ended up not getting it back.
Any shlich that
He's not a shliach. He's still the god. He's still the god. So therefore, he didn't fear it properly. So it's not considered a chazar l'bayim. Okay, I hear your kasha. That's the first verse that you have a problem with the fivers, and that's fine. But we have more to Rusa. Kiyasa Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan is speaking b'shoichet mimim b'fnim shaloi l'shem b'ayim. It's speaking where he's shechted shaloi l'shem b'ayim. So it is a shchita ruya. The meat can be eaten, but it's not oila l'bayim l'shem chayva. That's not chazor keren l'bayim. There, even the Chaim would agree that it's not chazor keren l'bayim. Rish Lakish has a third pshat. Rish Lakish says b'shoichet b'alei mumin b'chutz. It was speaking where you it became a balmum. It became a balmum, and you shechted it b'chutz. And therefore, it's not chazor keren l'bayim, but it is mutter.
Shala is when it became a balmum.
I want hold that question. That'll become very, very relevant as to when it became balmum. Because the problem is, even if it became balmum, it's pointed. So we're going to get there. Toiba Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Lazar was speaking to Rabbi Yochanan, and he had a problem with all these terutzim. He said, "Shchita materes." Oh, you tell me the shchita is matir, and therefore, if it was shachat temimim shalol shembaylim or shachat shembaylim and nishbach adam, those would be considered shchitos, kosher shchitos that are materit, and therefore it's a shchita read. You be chayv dalvei, v'alei zrika materes. It's the zrika that's a matir. So at the time of the shchita, it was a shchita she'eni ru'uya. So it was a shchita she'eni ru'uya, zok Rashi, u'b'shas tvicha shchita she'eni ru'uya. So why is there chiv dalvei? Zok to Gemara, l'Rish Lakish, and Rish Lakish, and even according to Rish Lakish, who said it was shaykhid bali mumin, the shchita alone isn't matter either. Shchita materes, balei pediya materes. You're going to have to be poided. Zok to Gemara is tamitzei ha Rab Shimon. You forgot another halacha that Rab Shimon taught us. What is another halacha that Rab Shimon taught us? Kol ha'oimid lizroi kizartam. If something's ready to be spritzed and everything is here that we need, it's as if it's done. And and anything you could be paid is kapadi done. The problem is when you want to be paid the kachim needs hamada barach. You have to be able to stand it up and assess it. So if you have a balmum, you could stand it up and assess it. You could be paid it. After it's geschachten, how could you make hamada barach? So what do you mean you can be pointed? Once you shecht it, you can't be pointed anymore. Zokt Rashi, because of this, you know what Rish Lakish means b'shoichet balamum and b'chutz? We're not even talking about a kachim. We're talking about bedek habayis. It became a balmum before you were makdish. If it's a balmum before you were makdish, it automatically is bedek habayis. And it's speaking about someone stealing a bedek habayis for not a carbon, an animal of bedek habayis.
It's beginning by hegdish. Besides this.
Because I guess he's still responsible for it. Zog to Gemara, Zog to Gemara, how do I know this rule of the Tanya? I know it from a brisa. Rabbi Shimon said, "Yesh noisar. Noisar is a carbon that was left past the point of where it could be eaten, and therefore can't be eaten anymore." Now, there's a halacha of something called tumas oichel. Tumas oichel has important ramifications. Something that's an oichel could become tamei even as a sheni l'tuma. A person, the lowest level of tuma that he could become is a rishon tuma. A oichel could even become a sheni l'tuma.
Shiny at the rice to be put.
Yeah, sheni l'tuma for an oichel. So the question here is, what is an oichel? we know in order to be noichel, it has to be a food. It had to be edible. So Zok Reb Shimon, yesh noiser shehu matama to masaychlin, because it was considered an oichel, it was mutter to eat at one point. But yesh noiser she'eni matama to masaychlin, you could have noiser that can be ever considered an oichel at all, and therefore wouldn't have to masaychlin. Ketzad, lon lefnei zrika. What if you never made zrika, meaning it was never allowed to be eaten? But before they made the zrika, it was already past the time where it's allowed to be eaten. That piece of meat will not be matama to masaychlin. It's a piece of meat, but since it's a piece of meat that never had a heter to be eaten, it won't become tummy. The kaimalon, let me finish. The kaimalon, and we know it doesn't literally mean if there's zrika or not. Even if there's no zrika, it's also going to be matama to masaychlin. What does it mean? Lefnei zrika, kodim shenir zrika. If it never reached the point where it was even possible to make a zrika on it, that's called ein zoruk, and that's called something that's not a noichel. But la'achar zrika means la'achar shenir zrika, even if you didn't make the zrika yet. If a point in time arrived where I could have made the zrika, but I didn't, that's called a noichel because it was royal zrika. Kodim shenir zrika lon mahi. How is it possible that it was possible lina before it was royal zrika? Very simple. To like have a shows by yoim lemizukei. You had no time, meaning the shachta is samach l'shkiyas hachama. You shechted the animal so close to the shkia that there was simply not enough time. It was impossible that after the shkita you should be able to do the zrika before shkia. So therefore, when you shechted this animal, this meat was never zrikable meat because it was just too late. That will not be considered an oichel. That will not be matama to masoichel. The ain't matama to masoichel. But if it was la'agash in zrika, the Abba shows b'yam lemizukei. You finished the shkita 5 minutes before the shkia. Those 5 minutes you could have done the zrika, even though you didn't. Matama to masoichlin, almo kala oimid lizroik kizarik dami. But where do you see the other halacha of kala oimid livdos kapadi dami? The Tanya, even though it's tomorrow's daf, but I can't control myself because I want to learn about blat gemara in 1 second. I don't even think you could make zrika. I don't even think you could make zrika in that short period of time where I'm going to learn a umad gemara. I'm sure neimer. So I should have a wonderful, wonderful day. And tomorrow we will learn this beautiful Amud of Ayin Zayin, which I don't know if it's the shortest blot in Shas, because if you add the second Amud to it, but it's definitely the shortest Amud in Shas. And I'm not sure about Tosfos. We'll probably have there's very scientific Tosfos that we'll probably have to learn most of anyway. But the Gemara is short. I remember when we were in Philadelphia Yeshiva, we had a Goyish math teacher, and he saw that we studied Talmud the whole day, and English was a small part of the day, so he was interested in what a Talmud is. So we were showing him around. So we showed him the middle is the main Gemara, and then the Rashi's on the inner column, and Tosfos elaborates more on the outer column. And when we showed him this stuff, he says, "I don't know what this words mean, but whatever it is, it must have been a really good line." Okay, gewaltig.